throughout the 613 laws that God gave to Moses, not only did he give him the law, he also gave him specific instructions on how the tabernacle was supposed to be set up. And that was the tent of worship, the tent of meeting. And inside there we had the holy place, and we had the courtyard, and the holy place, and the holy of holies. And only the high priest could go into the holy of holies one time per year. And even when he went in there, they tied a cord around his waist so they could drag him out in case God got mad at him while he was in there and put him to death. If he touched something he shouldn't or did something he shouldn't. So anyway, God gave Moses all the parameters on how all this was supposed to be set up. And so we're going to talk a little bit about that today. But God's glory had passed before Moses when he was up on the mountain. He had asked God specifically, I want to see your glory. And God said, no one can see me and live. No one can see my face and live. So he puts him in the cleft of a rock and he covers him with his hand. I believe there's a song about that we used to sing. And so he puts him there, and God causes all his goodness to pass by Moses, but he's only allowed to see his back. But even then, when Moses comes down to the mountain, the people are scared of him because his face is glowing. And he has to cover his face with a veil when he talks to the people, and then when he's by himself, he can take the veil off. But God passes by there, and he has so much to give the people when he comes down the mountain. So he assembles all the people in Exodus chapter 35. And he begins to lay out some of the stuff that the people are supposed to do. And so the first thing he did, God had him reassert the Sabbath. And what the Sabbath was. Now, most of us are familiar with that. That's Saturday, as far as the Jewish faith is concerned. And God had him reassert to the people the Sabbath. Now, he already told them about the Sabbath. They already knew they were supposed to rest on the final day of the week, and then they could get back to work. But work in 6 days, rest on the seventh day, that was on Saturday, and it was the Sabbath. So God had Moses repeat this, and let the people know just exactly how critical it was that they do that. So, complete rest and worship one day of the week. Now, they weren't even allowed to prepare much of a meal on that day. It was pretty well leftovers. That's the only day, if you remember, when they were in the wilderness, that they could gather extra manna and quail, so they didn't have to work on the Sabbath at all. So they would just rest, and they would worship God. And that's what that was for on that seventh day. So why was that so important? Why was it such a big deal to God to repeat this again? I think this is the third time that God had mentioned that if you don't adhere to the Sabbath, then you're going to be completely cut off from your people. It was important because God knows our tendency to overcommit, and He knows our tendency to overburden ourselves. There are many of you here today, which I would number myself among, who don't really know how to say no. Right? I mean, we do things until we're completely exhausted, and we overpromise, and we can't get everything done that we say that we're going to do. And it's with very good intentions that we do that, but we overburden ourselves in always saying yes to all of these things. And while the command of the Sabbath and keeping it holy is not specifically repeated in the New Testament, the principle is there. And the principle is sound and it's solid in the New Testament as far as what we're supposed to do. God didn't all of a sudden in the New Testament tell everyone it's okay to work so much that you hurt your relationships and your health and your well-being. God set up the Sabbath rest because He knew that His people needed it. All of these multitude of dietary laws that we see in the Old Testament, of things that they can eat, things that they can't eat, all of those things were given to the Israelites for their own good, because God wanted them to be healthy, and He wanted them to be prosperous. And so this idea of the Sabbath rest, of taking a break on the seventh day, it was for their own good, because God knew what was going to happen to them as people if they didn't take this time off. So we're going to jump right in today in the introduction, if you will, with the first lesson, the first challenge that I think God tells to His people today, just like He told to His people back then, and this is it. Are you, as an individual, as a family, are you getting the rest that you need? Are you getting the rest that you need? How many of you this morning, as you came here, are absolutely exhausted. You're tired. Most of us, we're totally exhausted from the week of work. Now, most of you probably aren't going to take today and relax. We even had a conversation about this earlier in the restaurant, about tired. We're all tired. Everybody's tired. And it's hard to find time for that rest. But I want you to know that God instituted this in Scripture for a reason. And it was so that His people could rejuvenate. And it wasn't just rest like not doing anything. It was a time for worship. And it was a time for meditation where they could lay aside everything else that was going on. So I want you to know I'm not just talking about vacation. How many of you have ever been on a restful vacation? I mean, I've been on maybe one or two. But usually when I go on vacation, the old quote is, a vacation is a system by which those who are merely tired become totally exhausted. And I think that that's so true, that it's just not restful because we're constantly going and doing all that. Last winter, Mindy really doesn't like cold, and she likes to be warm, and I hear all the time in the wintertime, I hate the cold. I hate to be cold, and I know that. And I hate to be hot, so we're kind of backwards on that. But I decided, we found some plane tickets to Fort Lauderdale for $75 a piece, round trip. And I thought, hey, let's go to Fort Lauderdale for about 3 days. We'll drive around, we'll see some stuff. She can get warm and happy, and everything will be good. So we go down there, we rent a vehicle, and we decide to go see some sights while we're there. We drove 1,200 miles in 3 days. Just because we wanted to see stuff. And I want you to know that's not relaxing. It was nice to be warm, and it was nice to have a happy wife, but it was not relaxing. And so many of the things that we do in life lead us to that, to more exhaustion and not rest. And that's why it's in error when we try to jam all of our relaxing and catching up on things into 2 weeks of vacation in a year. It doesn't work that way. And God knew it didn't work that way. That's why He set up the Sabbath. That's why He set it up so people were supposed to 1 day a week just do nothing. And we're not very good at that. And the principle of the Sabbath, it's not that Saturday is holy and anymore to us, and God didn't say we're going to take the Sabbath on Saturday and move it to Sunday. He didn't say that at all. And I know I've talked about this not too long ago, but I really felt like I needed to hammer on it some more because it's so important to God. It was so important to His people here. And He said that they're rest, so it doesn't necessarily have to be Sunday. It can be another day of the week, or as busy as we are now, sometimes it just needs to come in 3 or 4 hour increments. I can do a lot of relaxing in 3 or 4 hours if I just pick an evening and I just relax and take some time off from doing all the things that we do. Now, God set up these laws because He knew His people needed them. He knew that it was critical. And He knew that worship and spending time with family, they did that a lot. They weren't allowed to really go much any place, so they were inside their tents or whatever houses, dwellings they had, and they were there with their family. And today, in our world, family time is not often relaxing. So we hear the whole family's coming over for supper. And we're going to spend time with family. So what's the first thing you do? You do the 90-mile-an-hour fluffing stuff. Okay? So all the stuff that's laying out, it shouldn't be laying out. You're trying to put that together, even though it's just family. And then it's the preparation for the meal. I mean, you can't have a meal without the full-blown thing. It's not just like a pot of soup and some crackers and you throw it out there. It seems like it's always more involved than that. And that time doesn't even wind up being relaxing. And when you have kids with kids and they drag their kids there, a lot of times that whole process is not relaxing for them either. So all of this stuff that we do is really apart from what God intended when He set up this idea of Sabbath rest. Worship. It's important. We need downtime. Now, parents, grandparents, we need to be instilling this concept into our children so they understand what rest is and they understand what it's for. So, I was watching my son, my oldest son, the other day, and talking to him a little bit about what's going on in his life. And Bible study 2 nights a week, and church on Sunday, working 2 jobs, and trying to do all this stuff. And I told Mindy, he's going to wear himself down. He's going to burn himself out. Why is he doing that? And she looked at me with that smirk, like, you know exactly where he got that example. And we tend to pass those things down to our kids because we don't make those times of rest a priority. And God says specifically that's what He wants us to do. So I want to encourage you today and challenge you today as God reiterated the importance of the Sabbath rest to His people, that we recognize the importance of this principle and this concept. That the Sabbath rest for them, it wasn't going to a ball game. It wasn't going to a movie. It wasn't watching TV. It wasn't going to the lake. It wasn't going on vacation. It was none of those things. It was not the excuse that I always used. Well, yes, I'm doing some work, but I really enjoy it and it's relaxing. Always use that. That's not what God intended. It was to rest and to worship and to spend time with relationships and to spend time with family. God was serious about that. And it was super, super important to Him. And many, I believe, of the difficulties and health problems and relationship problems and all that we see in the world today come from the go, go, go all the time mentality that we have. And when we stop and we recharge and we rest, great things start to happen in our lives. So I say again, as I say before, sometimes the most godly thing that we can do is just rest. And just take some time to do what God intended for the Israelite people to do back then. Okay, I'll step off of my soapbox for a minute. We'll continue on with Moses. Next, Moses gathered all the skillful craftsmen together to make all that the Lord had commanded him to make, as far as all the stuff that went in the tabernacle. And I find all of these little items very fascinating that God wanted them to put in the tabernacle. And there were requirements even for the rings that they were hanging the curtains on. It was really specific that God wanted done in the tabernacle. Don't have time to get into all of those, but maybe sometime we'll do a Bible study where we can actually see all of the setup and the way that the tabernacle worked. But the people, the Israelites, were to bring donations together for all of the materials needed for the tabernacle. I find it interesting with the Israelites that their leader, Moses, said to them, once they got enough donations, don't bring anything else. Now, what other leader of any nation ever would ever say, we have enough, don't bring us any more stuff? No more donations, no more taxes. No one would ever say that. So it's interesting that God was giving him the direction that we have enough stuff here and we don't need any more. So in Exodus chapter 35, verses 30 through 35, then Moses said to the people of Israel, see, the Lord has called by name Bezalel, the son of Uri, the son of Hur of the tribe of Judah. I hate when it goes up on the screen when you can see the words, because I can pronounce them however I want to when the words aren't up there. But now you're knowing how bad I'm butchering them. And filled him with the Spirit of God, with skill and intelligence, with knowledge, and with all craftsmanship, to devise artistic designs, to work in gold and silver and bronze, in cutting stones for setting, and in carving wood for work in every skilled craft. And he has inspired him to teach, both him and Aholiab, the son of Ahisamach, and the tribe of Dan. He has filled them with skill to do every sort of work done by an engraver or a designer or by an embroiderer in blue and purple and scarlet yarns and fine twined linen, or by a weaver, by any sort of workman or skilled designer. Now, I point this out in what's happening, first of all, because I find it fascinating, but I also think it serves as a good reminder to us. The next little portion in Exodus 36, just the first 2 verses, it says, Bezalel, Oholib, and every craftsman in whom the Lord has put skill and intelligence to know how to do any work in the construction of the sanctuary shall work in accordance with all that the Lord has commanded. And Moses called those two dudes, and every craftsman in whose mind the Lord had put skill, everyone whose heart stirred him up to come and do the work. So I find it very interesting that the giver of talent and ability is the Lord. Did you notice that? That these guys who have the ability to be skilled in engraving and design and all of that stuff, it's very obvious here that he's telling us that it's God who endowed them with these gifts to be able to do that thing. Now, artistic ability is not found in my DNA. It's just not. And if I look at my brothers, Josh is not an artist. Jamie and Joe are not artists. We struggle with stick figures. That's not something that we can do. But yet I have friends that didn't go to school to do anything and can take a pencil down and can sketch a person and have it look just perfect. And I just remind us that God has given all of us unique gifts and abilities. And sometimes He even endows people with those abilities in special times when that particular gift is needed. And these guys, they had it and they knew it. And He said He also even, that they were inspired to teach. And so they taught people to be able to do things as well. And in 1 Corinthians 12, 4 through 11, it says there are different kinds of gifts, but the same Spirit. Different kinds of service, but the same Lord. There are different kinds of working, but the same God works all of them in all men. Now to each one the manifestation of the Spirit is given for the common good. To one there is given through the Spirit the message of wisdom. To another the message of knowledge by means of the same Spirit. To another faith by the same Spirit. To another gifts of healing by that one Spirit. To another miraculous powers. To another prophecy. To another distinguishing between spirits. To another different kinds of tongues. And still to another the interpretation of tongues. All these are the work of one and the same Spirit, and He gives them to each one just as He determines. God gives abilities and gifts to people for a reason. And secondly, today I want to encourage you, and I want to let you know that God never intended your gift to lie dormant, whatever it is. Maybe you have a skilled trade that you can do that very few other people around can do. Maybe you're able to do this or to do that, and you may look at that ability that you have and say, that's just not much, but to God it is, because He gave it to you for a very specific reason. And I don't know why He gives one person this gift and one person that gift, I don't understand, but those abilities that we have, they are to be put to use for His kingdom. Now, we also earn a living with those abilities, and that's a great thing that we do that. But those abilities that we have, the talents that we have, these divine gifts that God has given to us, be they spiritual gifts or the ability to carve something, all of those things are to be used for His kingdom in some capacity or another. And it's just a reminder to us here as He had gifted these individuals to make all these articles of the tabernacle, that He's given all of us gifts for a reason. And that reason is including using them for His kingdom. Now we get to a point in Scripture that we've been leading up to here when we have the death of Moses. And the Israelites are getting ready to go into the promised land. God has kept saying, I promised in this land to Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, and you're going to get into this promised land. And they've been hearing about it for generations. Generations. And many of them had died off in the wilderness because God said they were going to, because of their disobedience and their lack of trust in Him. Idolatry, that was a lot of it. But Moses struck a rock and got water from it for the Israelites, and God specifically told him to do it the first time. It was great. The livestock got water, the people got water. God told him to do it a second time. And it was at God's instruction that he was supposed to do it. And he struck the rock the second time, but he had a bad attitude about it. And the Bible said that he didn't give God the glory. Now, as great of a guy as Moses was, and we're going to read a little bit of a eulogy in Scripture that's given about Moses' life, we see what a great guy he was, and how he talked to God as one talks to his friend. He was very close to him, and I don't really know what happened exactly when he struck the rock and didn't give God the glory for it, but it must have been a big deal, especially in God's eyes. Because God said, because you've done this and you've not honored me through it, you're not going to be able to lead the children of Israel into the promised land. And so it was Joshua, the son of Nun, that got that distinguished honor of being able to lead them there. There's a few verses here I want to read with you. Deuteronomy chapter 34, verses 1 through 6. It said, Then Moses climbed Mount Nebo from the plains of Moab to the top of Pisgah across from Jericho. I stopped. He was by himself when he went up there, presumably. He was 120 when this happened. How many of you want to go climb a mountain right now? Moses must have been pretty spry in his old age. At 120, he goes and climbs this mountain. There the Lord showed him the whole land from Gilead to Dan, all of Naphtali, the territory of Ephraim and Manasseh, all the land of Judah as far as the western sea, the Negev and the whole region from the valley of Jericho, the city of palms, as far as Zor. Then the Lord said to him, This is the land I promised on oath to Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. When I said it, I will give it to your descendants. Then he goes on and he says, I've let you see it with your eyes, but you will not cross over into it. And Moses, the servant of the Lord, died there in Moab, as the Lord said. He buried him in Moab, in the valley opposite Beth Peor, but to this day no one knows where his grave is. Moses was 120 years old when he died, yet his eyes were not weak, nor his strength gone. The Israelites grieved for Moses in the plains of Moab 30 days, until the time of weeping and mourning was over. Now Joshua, son of Nun, was filled with the spirit of wisdom, because Moses had laid his hands on him. So the Israelites listened to him and did what the Lord commanded Moses. Since then, no prophet has risen in Israel like Moses, whom the Lord knew face to face, who did all those miraculous signs and wonders the Lord sent him to do in Egypt, to Pharaoh, and to all his officials, and to his whole land. For no one has ever shown the mighty power or performed the awesome deeds that Moses did in the sight of all of Israel. Can you imagine for a moment being at Moses' funeral, if funerals were like they are today? Now Moses was buried out here in the plains, and no one knows where his grave is, but they still would have had a memorial service, right? And they still would have got everybody together and talked about him and eaten food. That's just what you do. But can you imagine? I've been to some funerals, and I've preached some funerals of some pretty special and spectacular people. And there were a lot of stories that could be told about them, and there were a lot of accomplishments that they had made on this earth, and a lot of people's lives that they had touched. But can you imagine reflecting over the life of Moses? There's sometimes in preaching a funeral service that I either didn't know the person very well or at all, or had difficulty coming up with things to say. I could preach Moses' funeral right now. And it'd take me 3 or 4 hours to get through it. His upbringing, when he was in a basket in the Nile River, remember that, because they were killing all the babies, and he was barely spared because he was floating around in the Nile and found by Pharaoh's daughter and grew up in the house of the prince. There was the murder that he committed. Now, we wouldn't talk about that at somebody's funeral. You know, they killed somebody years ago, but they're really an okay guy. I probably wouldn't say that. But Moses, he killed somebody. He committed murder. He wasn't supposed to do that, but that was part of his life. And then he goes on the backside of the desert, and he meets Jethro or Reuel, and he marries one of his daughters, and he becomes a shepherd. For 40 years he's out there doing that. Talk about switching careers. Moses definitely was a diverse character. He sees a burning bush. No one had ever seen a burning bush before that didn't burn up. And all of the dealings the Scriptures already mentioned here, and the miracles that favored that Moses did in the presence of Pharaoh. You talk about living a rich and exciting life. Leading this great nation of millions of people, crossing the Red Sea, striking the rock to get water from it, and the manna and the quail of a pillar of fire, and talking to God as one talks to a friend, and seeing God's glory pass by. Maybe that's why God just took Moses' body and buried it. God's people were prone to worship stuff they shouldn't worship anyway, weren't they? How easy would it have been for them to do some Moses worship? And maybe that's why God just took his body and buried it. And to this day, no one knows where his grave is. Now on to Joshua. The mantle has been passed. Joshua sent spies into the land, and this is the second time that spies have been sent in. Before they sent spies in, and 10 were bad, 2 were good. You know the old song. And so the 2 that came back said, we can do this, but they listened to the 10, and God said, you're going to wander around in this wilderness until a whole lot of you die. And they sent spies again, and 2 of them went into the land, and they stayed with Rahab the prostitute, if you remember that story. So much here that we can talk about that we won't. But she found favor in their eyes, and they told her to hang a scarlet cord out the window, and her place would be spared. And the spies came back and said, the Lord has given the whole land into our hands. All the people are melting in fear because of us. And in Joshua chapter 3, it says, early in the morning, the people set out, the Israelites did, and they went to the Jordan, where they camped there before crossing over. And after 3 days of camping there, the officers went throughout the camp, and they were giving them instructions on what was about to happen. And they said, when you see the Ark of the Covenant of the Lord your God and the priests who are Levites carrying it, you're to move out of position, and you're supposed to follow it. And he said, you don't know which way you're going to go, so follow the ark. But he said, keep 1,000 yards between you and the ark. 1,000 yards. Did you even see an ark at 1,000 yards? You know how far 1,000 yards is? A long way. They weren't even allowed to get that close to the Ark of the Covenant. Holiness of God. So they stayed back, but they were going to follow it, but they came through again, and Joshua told the people, consecrate yourselves, for tomorrow the Lord will do amazing things among you. Consecrate yourself. What's consecrate mean? I got to tell you, I thought I had a pretty good idea, and I guess I did, about what consecrate was, but I don't use that word when I talk on a daily basis. So I looked it up. It means to declare or set apart as sacred. So what does declare or set apart as sacred mean? Holy, right? Set apart. So they were to set themselves apart. They were to consecrate themselves. They were to be set apart, to be declared as sacred, to get ready for what God was about to do among them. And so Joshua tells the priests after this is done, take the Ark of the Covenant, go on up ahead of them, and so they did that. And the Lord said to Joshua, today I will begin to exalt you in the eyes of all Israel, so they may know that I am with you as I was with Moses. Just process that. Can you imagine being Joshua? And you're taking over for Moses? There's no way anybody's going to like you to start with. There's no way anybody is going to think that you are God's divine leader to start with. And so God did some razzle-dazzle type stuff through Joshua in order that they would realize that God was really with Joshua. It was necessary. And God tells him he's going to do this. And so the priests go to the water's edge. And the Bible tells us as soon as the priests who carry the Ark of the Covenant of the Lord of all the earth, set foot in the Jordan, its waters flowing downstream will be cut off and stand in a large heap. That's what he tells them. break in to go across the Jordan, the priest carried the Ark of the Covenant go ahead. Now the Bible tells us specifically in verse 19, the Jordan River is at flood stage at this point. It's at flood stage. So it's not easy for them to get across at this point in any way, shape, or form. Yet as soon as the priests who were carrying the Ark of the Covenant, as soon as their feet touched the water's edge, the water upstream stopped flowing. What a cool deal. What an amazing thing to see. And the water stops flowing, and then all of the Israelites walk across on dry ground. The stream stopped flowing at the town of Adam, or Adam, A-D-A-M. And that town is 17 miles, the Bible tells us, from the spot where the Israelites crossed the Jordan River. But it stopped flowing 17 miles up, but it stopped flowing right there as soon as the priest's feet touched the water. What an amazing miracle of timing that God instituted. Now there's lots of archaeologists that speculate on what actually happened, because in this area, apparently it's very well known for landslides. And the Jordan River has been shut off before because of landslides. And I guess since then it has been. But that doesn't negate how incredible this miracle is. Because it happened at precisely the right time when the feet of the priest touched the water. So they crossed over on the Jordan, and the priests who carried the ark, they stood firm on the dry ground in the middle of the Jordan, while all of Israel passed by until the whole nation had gone over. It's interesting to me that God uses a miracle similar to the crossing of the Red Sea to establish Joshua as his name. Have you ever thought about that? How neat that is? Because the big one for Moses, I mean, the plagues were really cool and all that stuff, but the big one was the Red Sea, right? They all walked across on dry land, and all the Egyptian chariots and horsemen all drowned in the Red Sea. That was the big deal. The Jordan River is at flood stage, and depending on where you understand the crossing of the Red Sea to be, the Jordan River in flood stage could have been just as treacherous, or more so, than where they crossed the Red Sea, because it was a flowing river at flood stage. And so God uses very much the same miracle to establish Joshua as the next leader. A great miracle that he used so the people would know that he was really with them. Now, as we wrap up today, I want to point out a lesson that I like to learn from this story. And you can take anything from it that you want to, but this is the one that I like to learn from this, and that I'm reminded of whenever I read the story. All of the action on this miracle took place upstream. That's where it all happened. Whether it was a landslide, whether it was a bunch of boulders, whether it was God just holding back the water with his mighty hand, whatever it was, the water that many miles upstream stopped flowing at precisely the right time. And that reminds me that God is doing things that I cannot even see to affect things that are in front of me right now. That He's working upstream, for lack of a better word. He's working in ways that I don't see particularly, but those ways in which He is working affects me where I'm at right now. And that gives me great encouragement to know that some of the things that He allows to happen to me that I can't even see, that I don't even understand, are preparing me for something else that I'm going to see in the future. That He is working upstream in all of our lives, allowing things to happen to prepare us for the future. Things perhaps that do not even make sense. Things perhaps that we would look at currently in our life and say, this is not a good thing. This is not something that makes me happy. This is not a spot where I want to be right now. But the whole time that He's doing that, or allowing those things, sometimes it's trials, sometimes it's just guidance that He's giving us that we don't particularly like. that He's preparing us for something else in the future and we don't even know what it is. But if He hadn't done it, we wouldn't be prepared and we wouldn't be ready. He gets details worked out that we don't even understand. So I want you to know today, when you're embarking on a new journey, He's already there. When you're worried about a new job, He's already there. When you're worried about relationship problems, He's already there. And I find that some of the things that I fret and worry over in this life, by the time it comes for me to deal with them, God has already taken care of it. Or He's already made a way for it to be taken care of. He's already working way ahead of us. And I remind you that we are serving a God that knows everything, that is everywhere at once, and that is all-powerful. And we talk about everywhere at once, we're talking about the past and the present and the future. He doesn't have to, have the restrictions of dimensions like we do. And He can work upstream, ahead of us, in ways that we never can. And this amazing miracle of timing that we see here reminds me that timing is not accidental. It's not accidental. Have you felt most of your life, or some of your life, like you're always a day late and a dollar short? I hear that phrase a lot. But the day late and dollar short mentality doesn't cut it with God, because His timing is perfect. And He works out His timing in the lives of those who follow Him, because the Bible tells us that the steps of a righteous man are ordered by God. Ordered by God. That means He's showing me where to step. He's working upstream. He's messing with the timing in my life when it needs messed with, and working those things out for my good, as Romans says to us. So this morning, as we head out from here, let's remember the two main lessons from today's story. Maybe 3, maybe 4, however many you're going to remember. The first one is, God reiterated the concept of rest to His people over and over and over and over again. The penalty for not keeping the Sabbath was to be cut off from your people. You could no longer be in Israel. And I've always wondered about that. When you look at the rest of the 10 Commandments, have no other gods before me, don't make yourself a graven image. I can understand if you did that, you'd be cut off from your people. I can understand if you were a murderer, a liar, a cheat, and all those other commandments that are in there. You coveted things and all that. I can understand there being severe punishment for that. But one of the most severe punishments that is levied against those 10 Commandments is levied against breaking the Sabbath. And again, I'm not telling you that we have a Sabbath today. We're not under that covenant. And that Sabbath did not transfer to Sunday. And if you ever want to talk about that, I've got lots of scriptural references that I can give you to show that Sunday is not the Sabbath. But the principle is sound. And God gave the principle to His people because He knew it was what was best for them. And it was a pretty serious principle. Pretty serious commandment because of the punishment that is associated with it, to be cut off from your people. So if you are burning the candle at both ends, or if you are just not taking time for rest and worship, that's what God wants for you. It's what He's always wanted for His people. So find some time to build that into your life, however you can. And remember, it's not vacation, because those aren't relaxing. And remember, it's not preparing a big meal so the family can come over. That's not relaxing. That's not what He's talking about. It might be going for a walk and sitting on a stump someplace with nobody else around, and just taking a couple of hours to sit there. It might be go into a room in your house where you can just relax and shut the television off and all the other electronic devices and just sit there and relax and worship. So important. And God was dead serious when he set that up for his people. I want to remind you as we close too that God is working upstream. That he's working in ways that you can't even see. He's preparing things that you can't even see. And that he orders our steps if we are righteous and following him. And I believe, like he told the Israelites, he would tell us as well. When we are in that waiting and holding pattern, he says, consecrate yourself. For tomorrow God will do amazing things among you. And sometimes I wonder if he's waiting to do those amazing things among us because we're not set apart and holy. So when he says consecrate yourselves, he was serious. And it was then and only then that the amazing things started happening when the people were set apart to their God. Let's pray. Heavenly Father, we thank you so much for these accounts that we can read about and talk about in the Old Testament. I just pray that you help us to learn from these. Help us to remember when you make something important that it really is important for us, and it's important for us to pay attention. So God, I pray that you help us to ponder these things this week. It's in the name of Jesus that we pray.